Some stories are so creepy that, even if you don't directly experience them, they still manage to haunt you when you're alone at night. This story my mom told me is one of them. For the sake of the story, I'll call her Jill. I need you to imagine for a moment that we are about 30 years in the past when this story took place, in a typical American suburban neighborhood. Picture it in your mind. The houses were closely built, so there were narrow passageways between each one. At this moment in time, it was very quiet at around 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. The air was eerily still. Other than a few flickering light posts along Jill's street, there wasn't a lot of activity. Yet. Jill was single, living alone. She was letting her dog out on an extendable leash in her backyard to do his business. It just so happens that she had been interrupted mid-sleep cycle by her whining pup. So she obliged, crusty-eyed and barely conscious. Her dog was a fluffy chow chow named Rupert. He trotted to the end of the yard towards her. That's when Jill thought she may have been half dreaming, because she saw the figure of a little boy standing, staring. He looked to be about 7 years old, wearing this long white nightshirt and draped to his calves. It was something reminiscent of a hospital gown. He looked almost like a ghost. Jill rubbed her eyes and looked again to make sure she wasn't seeing things, but the boy was still there, his dark brown hair disheveled. He looked very pale looking, with purple shadows under a pair of very glazed eyes. Something jarred at Jill's instincts when she saw those eyes. She considered that the boy looked strikingly similar to the character Damien from the movie The Omen, which kind of freaked her out, especially given that it was 2 a.m. when she last checked the clock. The boy had an arm extended towards Rupert. At first, Jill assumed innocent intentions. She thought, yeah, it's weird that this kid is out in the middle of the night, but at the same time, he just kind of looked to be petting Rupert, who had taken a seat next to him. Rupert was a very trusting dog who'd go up to just about anybody and sit by their feet. Though the outdoor light was turned on, she hadn't fully registered the object that the kid held in his hand because he was standing partially in darkness. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust before she noticed that he was gripping the handle of an 8-inch chef's knife. Rupert obviously didn't detect the danger, but he was bobbing his head up and down a little, flinching. That's when she saw that the boy was slowly, rhythmically tapping his head with the point of the knife. Clearly Rupert wasn't hurt because he was still sitting there, letting the boy continue tapping, but Jill was understandably freaked out by this. "Rupert, come," she called to him. She wanted to get her dog inside as fast as possible, but something told her she shouldn't react in a way that might stir the boy. See, he was staring with this cloudy look like he was somewhere else in his mind, potentially sleepwalking or something. She worried that if she shouted at him to stop, or if she screamed, that he would wake up from his reverie and do something even worse with the knife. "Rupert, come here, boy." She spoke softly again. She tugged on the leash to pull him. Rupert complied after a couple of tugs. Once he was safely inside, she immediately closed the door behind him and locked it. It was one of those glass-style doors, so she could see when the boy silently approached it and tried to trigger the handle to follow Rupert inside. After a failed attempt to come inside, he started tapping the point of the knife against the glass in the same slow, repetitive motion that he was using when he tapped Rupert's head. He continued to have that glazed look on his face, his expression void of life. Jill was quietly watching in fearful silence, still trying to register what was happening. After a short moment, the boy stopped trying Jill's door and walked over to the next door neighbor's house where an older lady lived. Because there were no backyard fences, Jill saw that the boy slowly staggered to the back door of the woman's house, and she could actually hear him jostling the handle, making an effort to break in. Oh my God, what if my neighbor opens her back door to this kid? Jill thought. Panic raced through her. She dialed the police and explained the situation. There's a little boy outside. He has a knife. He's alone. There are no adults around. He's just out alone.
Are you safe?
The operator asked. Yeah, I'm in my house. The operator informed her that the police were on their way. The sound of a car pulling up to her other neighbor's front driveway alerted her attention. She felt obligated to warn her arriving neighbor about a boy running loose around the neighborhood, wielding a knife. She ran out of her front door and anxiously greeted the man, who was a pretty big dude, tall and muscular. Part of her was concerned for his personal safety, but the other part of her felt some relief, like maybe he could help her overpower the boy and take the knife away from him. The man looked to her, seeming a bit confused why he was being approached outside of his house this late. Jill was trying to reason in her mind what she was going to say to him. It was hard for her to form words. She was, after all, still having trouble comprehending it herself. Watch out for that kid? The words sounded kind of silly in her head. Hey, be careful. There's a little boy with a... But before she could finish her sentence, the little boy appeared around the corner, emerging from the dark passageway between their two homes. She gasped, panic suddenly in her throat. The kid, the kid, the kid, she screamed, but it was too late. The boy immediately started lunging after them. He still looked somewhat unaware as he maneuvered. His eyes glazed over, yet intent, as he thrusted the knife in heavy but silent stabbing motions. He looked very possessed-like. What the hell? The man shouted, dodging the child's blow. Whose fucking kid is this? Jill and her neighbor swiveled around his car, using it as a protective barrier to put space in between them and the boy. Jill noticed as the knife glistened in the glowing light of the street lamps. It was exactly like some scene in a horror movie. She couldn't believe this was actually happening outside of a film set. Is he yours? The man asked, his voice raised in anger and fear. No. Their exchange was torn a lot between, be careful, and whose kid is this? They were terrified, screaming as the boy chased them around the car. They kept running from his stabbing attempts in a mad frenzy. The boy's movements were very sporadic and unpredictable. He moved sluggishly, but would suddenly jolt in quick bursts of short movements. Oh my God! Jill screamed when he would suddenly dash for seconds at a time without any warning. In a bold maneuver, the man made a swift motion towards the attacker, lifting his leg to try to kick the knife out from the boy's grip. He did this a few times, taking steps back to dodge each blow in between kicks. He was a big dude, but even still, he was grunting under his breath, struggling to find the right pattern in the boy's attack to kick him without getting stabbed. Jill didn't see or hear the knife drop at all during the struggle. She used the earliest opportunity while the boy was distracted to run like hell back to her house. From there, she saw through the window as her neighbor abandoned his attempt. Adrenaline must have taken over him because he leapt over the car like some sort of stuntman in an action movie. He then sprinted to the front door of his house to safety. While peering out through her window, a chill ran down Jill's spine when she suddenly realized she couldn't see the boy anymore. The kid had vanished. Sometime in the scuffle of running, screaming, and watching her neighbor, she lost sight of the boy and his knife. This was more terrifying to her than when she had eyes on him and knew where he was. Jill suddenly felt so on edge that any light tapping noise made her jolt. She squealed at the slightest sound, even the low thudding of Rupert's paws against the tiled kitchen floor. Soon, even the sound of her own breathing was enough to startle her. It was the longest, most intense moment of her life. When she finally saw a police car pull up in front of her house, she felt safe enough to cautiously walk outside to greet the officer. She waved to him, and the man in uniform looked at her questioningly. "I'm the one who called," she told him.
"What are we looking for?"
"A little boy."
"What does he look like?"
He's about 3.5 feet tall, I think." She was still grappling with what had happened. She was still partially in shock while trying to describe him, saying, "He looks like a little doll wearing this long white shirt. He has dark hair."
"Do you know where he lived?"
the officer questioned. No, I don't. And I think there's something wrong with him."
"Okay, man. Stay inside your house. We'll go look for him."
Jill was frozen in her house for a while. She couldn't relax, still insanely freaked out by what had transpired. She tried her best to remain calm, but this felt almost impossible. The image of that boy's dark eyes in that glazed stare and the slow motion of his movements flickered through her thoughts. The hair on her arms raised. When she spotted the cop again, she quickly ran outside to see if they had found him.
"Yeah, we got him. It's fine. He's back with his parents now. Don't worry,"
they said. Is he going to do this again, or she felt she needed to know?
"He's a bit challenged,"
was all the officer would say. Maybe he didn't want to disclose too much information about a minor, but in a lot of ways, this was really frustrating to Jill, who had a lot of questions racing through her thoughts. Who is this kid? Was he sleepwalking? Why did his parents let him leave in the middle of the night? Why did he have access to their kitchenware? She also wondered things like, does he do this a lot? Where does he live so I know where to look out? What if my elderly neighbor's back door had been unlocked when the boy tried the handle? There were a lot of unanswered questions, but the only response she was given was,
"He's home now. Everything is safe."
Jill ended up moving to a new neighborhood within a year after this event took place. She had a difficult time living in fear and anticipation of whether something like this would happen again. When my mom, Jill, told me this story years later as an adult, it really freaked me out, and honestly, it still does. Whenever I find myself walking along the sidewalk at night in my suburb, especially if I'm alone, I imagine some little kid randomly peering out at me from the dark passageway between two houses, knife in hand. When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural, mountainous part of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a wedding to go to over an hour away and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was situated on a steep mountainside. Their back deck had a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill below, leading down to a river. Their closest neighbors were about half a mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night, there were no lights to be seen anywhere around them. Basically, it was the middle of nowhere, and you would have to know where you were going to get there. You don't just accidentally end up there. My aunt and uncle left us with some pizza and their cell phone number next to their landline, then headed out. It was the early 2000s, and I didn't have a cell phone, but even if I did, I wouldn't get reception there. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off, and the 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up on the loft. The loft overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a huge window that overlooked the driveway to the right. The description of the driveway is an important detail to the story. The road that led to the house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road. The house was as far as you could go. Go to the left driveway. There is a large open carport, and that's where my aunt and uncle, and anyone who ever visited, parked. The right driveway led down a very short but very steep hill to a large leveled-out area and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. It was never used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave and where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door, a normal door with a window so you could see right in. But this driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area because it was the only flat yard-like area on the property, and being on a mountainside, there isn't much room to safely play otherwise. No cars ever drove down there, ever. There are too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. It was about 10 p.m., pitch black outside, no moon to illuminate the area either. My cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye, and not my aunt's minivan headlights, huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. This was not my aunt and uncle. This was not anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled my body. I was a small teenage girl, alone in an isolated house on a mountain at night, with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who is that, Jake? Do you know whose truck that is?" And then he looked panicked. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure what to do, but the 2 little ones were sleeping down there, and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby and then grabbed the phone to call 911, and then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic fills me. I hear them try the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was actually knocking. It's not like they were checking to see if my uncle was down there. Plus, the lights were out. It was dark down there. They knew no one was down there. They were definitely breaking in. The door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear all of this going on. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob, just in case they did make it into the basement. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest. I'm talking to the 911 dispatcher as my 8-year-old cousin clings to my arm. The operator is calm and trying to calm me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes until a police officer could get up here, assuming they didn't get totally lost on this mountainside in the pitch dark. I just kept thinking, we are fucked, we are dead, this is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle left me so she could have another dispatcher call them and let them know the situation. I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, and to my absolute horror, I see a man peering in the large sliding glass door. A huge, burly, what had to have been 6'4" man with long, scraggly red hair and a big, red, bushy beard. And what made it worse, he was grinning at me, grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I had to have looked like a terrified deer in the headlights. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There was a second man behind him I couldn't see as well. I have no idea what he looked like, but he was equally as tall, but a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh my God, they're here!" And before the 911 operator can say anything, my 8-year-old cousin says, "Mr. Jim." His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "You know who this is?" But before my cousin could answer, I turned my attention to the man at the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door, because I do not think it was locked. The man stared at me hard for a moment, eyebrows furrowed, like deciding what he wanted to do next, but he then just backed away into the darkness. What seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back out of the driveway and then back down the road until they disappeared. I was still scared shitless, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like it was a close family friend, and obviously, because again, he went down the wrong driveway. Visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me they'd gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle, and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until a police officer showed up a bit later to make sure the men were gone, and they stayed with us until my aunt and uncle got home so they could ask them some questions. My uncle was furious, not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr. Jim guy. He muttered something like, "I'm going to fuck him up." My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back again. I didn't know at the time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I don't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplice were doing, or what they would have done if I wasn't on the phone with the police, but that grin was not a friendly one. It was sinister, and again, he also had to have known my uncle was not there, because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the window to basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He intended to break into the basement. That much is clear to me. There is no other explanation. I never did babysit for them again, and I don't think I ever even went back up there, because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. So, Mr. Jim, the grinning, burly mountain man who tried to break into the house where I was babysitting, let's not meet again. I've done quite well for myself as an adult, but when I was younger, we were very poor. In middle school, I lived in government housing projects that were like little one-level apartments with 2 apartments sharing a wall each, all spaced apart. There were woods directly behind the cluster of apartments, with no gate in between, but no one ever went into the woods, which I learned the reason for, due to this incident. These apartments were very poorly made, and the windows could easily be popped in and out, never mind a lock. The front door was somewhat sturdy, but with a good kick, it would have easily been opened. My dad was a pretty stocky bodybuilder type, so I had a false sense of security and would leave my window blinds open at night, as my room faced some trees that would blow in the wind. I loved nature and wasn't afraid of the dark, so I liked watching the trees as I fell asleep. Our apartment's front door was facing these woods, as was my friend's behind ours, with our building blocking their view. As you walk in the front door, the hallway is on the left. My room was at the end of the hallway on the right. My big window that took up most of my wall was on the left, and my bed was sideways facing both walls, so I could lay on my side and watch the trees. The woods were about a field away facing our front door, so I couldn't see it from my room. This was just a small area of trees and vegetation. One night, I woke up feeling a sense of unease, and through my sleepy haze, made out the figure of a large man standing in my window, watching me sleep with total confidence, not caring at all if he was seen. He was in a big coat and looked quite blurry in average to taller height. It was black in my room and outside, just barely illuminated by moonlight. I had just cracked open my eyes and froze once I realized what I was seeing. I kept my eyes as closed as possible, just enough to peer at him in the darkness, and literally rolled out of my bed to the side, not facing the window, and shouted for my dad who was across the hall, with both of our doors open as I crawled out. Not the smartest, but I was a dumb 12-year-old. He hadn't gone to sleep yet and was in my room in a heartbeat as the guy took off. He went to run out the front door yelling threats as well, which probably wasn't smart, but the guy was gone. I truly believe he never came in before or after this, just due to my dad's sheer size and build, but I'll never know. A few nights later, I was spending the night at my friend's place who lived directly behind us with the same layout. Her room was the first room on the left, with her window facing the woods / our apartment blocking her view. Her sister's was the second on the left, and her mom and toddler sisters were in the room on the right like mine in my own apartment. We finished watching Dave Chappelle and went to do one another's hair in her room, with her older sister helping us, while her mom and little sister went to bed. Not long after, we heard screaming from her mom's room and heavy stomping feet. Her older sister swung open the door to the room we were in, and there was a flash of a huge white man in his 30s or 40s running down the hall towards the living room and front door, and her mom behind him with a butcher knife, hacking at the air and screaming bloody murder. The dude flew out the door and towards the woods while her mom locked the door and called the cops. This man had the audacity to pop open the window and crawl into the bed that was pushed up against the window, just slightly under it, not realizing that this woman was a whole Amazon warrior who slept with a butcher knife and would clearly wake up to protect her baby. She was quick and had slashed at him, though I'm not sure of the damage, since I was ushered home directly after. The cops went looking for him in the woods and found him and another man quite similar to him, living and hiding out there together. They were also responding to a call from a frantic mother whose little girl had been taken that day as well from our housing unit, and they found her with those creeps. She had been there all day and night with them. She was around 3 or 4 years old. They were taken to jail, and that's the last I heard of it, as the adults didn't let us in on the adult conversations. Poor little girl was probably traumatized, and I hope she's been able to heal. I can't imagine what could have happened if my friend's mom hadn't been so quick and slept with a weapon, or if he had decided to fight instead of run. I still don't understand why he didn't try to overpower her, but it's possible she injured him. After this, my dad explained to me how sometimes drug addicts or homeless people would hang out in these woods. So, to the creepy dude who liked to peep and kidnap, let's not ever meet.